every preacher who teaches it, an enemy of mankind. Below this Christian dogma, savagery cannot go. It is the infant of malice, hatred, and revenge. Nothing could add to the heart. Century were sound in heart and brain. Only a few, in spite of the roar and din, in spite of savage cries, heard reason's voice. Only a few, in the wild rage of ignorance, fear, and zeal, preserved the perfect calm that wisdom gives. We have advanced. In a few years, the Christians will become, let us hope, humane and sensible enough to deny the dogma that fills the endless years with pain. They ought to know now that this dogma is utterly inconsistent with the wisdom, the justice, the goodness of their God. They ought to know that their belief in hell gives to the Holy Ghost, the dove, the beak of a vulture, and fills the mouth of the Lamb of God with the fangs of a viper. Anyone imagine that the author of Genesis knew anything about the sun, its size, that he was acquainted with Sirius, the North Star, or that he knew anything of the clusters of stars so far away that their light, now visiting our eyes, has been traveling for 2 million years? If he had known these facts, would he have said that Jehovah worked nearly 6 days to make this world and only a part of the afternoon on the 4th day to make the sun and the moon and all the stars? Yet millions of people insist that the writer of Genesis was inspired by the creator of all worlds. Now, intelligent men who are not frightened, whose brains have not been paralyzed by fear, know that the sacred story of creation was written by an ignorant savage. The story is inconsistent with all known facts, and every star shining in the heavens testifies that its author was an uninspired barbarian. I admit that this unknown writer was sincere, that he wrote what he believed to be true, that he did the best he could. He did not claim to be inspired, did not pretend that the story had been told to him by Jehovah. He simply stated the facts as he understood them. After I had learned a little about the stars, I concluded that this writer was inspired. This inspired scribe had been misled by myth and legend, and that he knew no more about creation than the average theologian of my day. In other words, that he knew absolutely nothing. And here, allow me to say that the ministers who are answering me are turning their guns in the wrong direction. These reverend gentlemen should attack the astronomers. They should malign and vilify Kepler and Newton and Herschel. These men were the real destroyers of the sacred story. Then, after having disposed of them, you can wage a war against the stars and against Jehovah himself for having furnished evidence against the truthfulness of his own book. Armored, the hippopotamus covered his body except for the under part with scales and plates that other animals could not pierce with tooth or tusk. But the same God made the rhinoceros and supplied him with a horn on his nose, with which he disembowels the hippopotamus. The same God made the eagle, the vulture, the hawk, and their helpless prey. On every hand, there seems to be a design to defeat design. If God created man, if he is the father of us all, why did he make the criminals, the insane, the deformed, the idiotic? Should the inferior man thank God? Should the mother who clasps to her breast an idiot child thank God? Should the slave thank God? The theologian says that God governs the wind, the rain, the lightning. How then can we account for the cyclone, the flood, the drought, the glittering bolt that kills? I suppose we had a man in this century. Just suppose we had a man in this century, in this country, who could control the wind, the rain, the lightning, and suppose we elected him to govern these things, and suppose that he allowed whole states to dry and wither, at the same time wasted the rain in the sea. Suppose that he allowed the winds to destroy cities and to crush to shapelessness thousands of men and women, and allowed the lightning to strike the life out of mothers and babes. What would we say? What would we think of such a savage? And yet, according to the theologians, this is exactly the course pursued by God. What do we think of a man who will not, when he has the power, protect his friends? Yet the Christians' God, allowed his enemies to torture and burn his friends, his worshippers? Who has ingenuity enough to explain this? What good man having the power to prevent it would allow the innocent to be imprisoned, chained in dungeons, and sigh against the dripping walls their weary lives away? If God governs the world, why is innocence not a perfect shield? Why does injustice triumph? Who can answer these questions? In answer, the intelligent, honest man must say, I do not know.
Ooh, Norman, looky here. This is fantastic.
God must be, if he exists, a person, a conscious being. Who can imagine an infinite personality? This God must have force, and we cannot conceive of force apart from matter. This God must be material. He must have the means by which he changes force to what we call thought. When he thinks, he uses force that must be replaced. Yet we are told that he is infinitely wise. If he is, does he not think? Thought is a ladder, a process by which we reach a conclusion. He who knows all conclusions cannot think. He cannot hope or fear. When knowledge is perfect, there can be no passion, no emotion. If God is infinite, he does not want. He has all. He who does not want does not act. The infinite must dwell in eternal calm. It is impossible to conceive of such a being, to imagine a square triangle, or to think of a circle without a diameter. Yet we are told that it is our duty to love this God. Can we love the unknown, the inconceivable? Can it be our duty to love anybody? It is our duty to act justly, honestly, but it cannot be our duty to love. We cannot be under obligation to admire a painting, to be charmed with a poem or thrilled with music. Admiration cannot be controlled. Taste and love are not the servants of the will. Love is and must be free. It rises from the heart like perfume from a flower. For thousands of ages, men and women have been trying to love the gods, trying to soften their hearts, trying to get their aid. I see them all. The panorama passes before me. I see them with outstretched hands, with reverently closed eyes, worshiping the sun. I see them bowing in their fear and need to stones, imploring serpents, beasts, and sacred trees, praying to idols wrought of wood and stone. I see them building altars to the unseen powers, staining them with blood, the blood of children and beasts. I see the countless priests and hear their solemn chants. I see the dying victims, the smoking altars, the swinging censers, the rising clouds. I see the half-god man, the mournful Christ in many lands. I see the common things of life change to miracles as they speed from mouth to mouth. I see the insane prophets reading the secret book of fate by signs and dreams. I see them all, the Assyrians chanting the praises of Ashur and Ishtar, the Hindus worshiping Brahma, Vishnu, the white-armed Chaldeans sacrificing to Bel and Hia, the Egyptians bowing to Ra, Oriasis, Isis. I see them all by the Euphrates, the Ganges, the Nile. I see the Greeks building temples to Zeus, Neptune, and Venus. I see the Romans kneeling to 100 gods. I see others spurning idols and pouring out their hopes and fears to a vague image in the mind. I see multitudes with open mouths receive as truth the myths and fables of the vanished years. I see them give their toil, their wealth, to robe the priests, to build the vaulted roofs, the spacious aisles, the glittering domes. I see them clad in rags, huddled in dens and huts, devouring crusts and scraps. Crusts and scraps. They may give the more to ghosts and gods. I see them make their cruel creeds and fill the world with hatred, war, and death. I see them with their faces in the dust, in the dark days of plague and sudden death when cheeks and lips are white for lack of bread. I hear their prayers, their sighs, their sobs. I see them kiss the unconscious lips of their hot tears, fall on the face of the dead. I see the nations as they fade and fail. I see them captured and enslaved, I see their altars mingle with the common earth, their temples crumble slowly back to dust. I see their gods grow old and weak and firm and faint. I see them fall from vague and misty thrones, helpless and dead. The worshippers receive no help. Injustice triumphs. Toilers are paid with the lash. Babes are sold. The innocent stand on scaffolds, and their heroic perish in flames. I see the earthquakes devour, the volcanoes overwhelm, the cyclones wreck, the floods destroy, and the lightnings kill. The nations perished, the gods died, the toll and wrath were lost, the temples were built in vain, and all the prayers died unanswered in the heedless air. At the hour of 2 o'clock, Friday, TGIF, April the 22nd, 1988. In conclusion, from a pamphlet entitled Why I Am an Agnostic, written by Robert Ingersoll. Is there a supernatural power, an arbitrary mind, an enthroned God, a supreme will that sways the tides and currents of the world, to which all causes bow? I do not deny. I do not know. But I do not believe. I believe that the natural is supreme, that from the infinite chain no link can be lost or broken. But there is no supernatural power that can answer prayer, no power that worship can persuade or change, no power that cares for man. I believe that with infinite arms, nature embraces the all. And there is no interference, no chance, that behind every event are the necessary and countless causes, and that beyond every event will be and must be the necessary and countless effects. Man must protect himself. He cannot depend upon by finding the facts, by developing his brain to the end that he may overcome the obstruction and take advantage of the forces of nature. Is there a God? I do not know. Is man immortal? I do not know. One thing I do know, and that is that neither hope nor fear, belief nor denial can change the fact. And it is as it is, and will be as it must be. When I became convinced that the universe is natural, that all the ghosts and gods are myths, there entered into my brain, into my soul, into my every drop of my blood, the sense, the feeling, the joy of freedom. The walls of my prison crumbled and fell. The dungeon was flooded with light, and all the bolts and bars and manacles became dust. I was no longer a servant, a serf, or a slave. There was for me no master in all the wide world, not even in infinite space. I was free. Free to think, free to express my thoughts, free to live to my own ideal, free to live for myself and those I loved, free to use all of my faculties, all of my senses, free to spread imagination's wings, free to investigate, to guess and dream and hope, free to judge and determine for myself, free to reject all ignorant and cruel creeds, all the inspired books that savages have produced, all the barbarous legends of the past, free from popes and priests, free from all the called and set apart, free from sanctified mistakes and holy lies, free from the fear of eternal pain, free from the winged monsters of the night, free from devils, ghosts, and gods. For the first time I was free. There was no prohibited places in all the realm of thought. No air, no space where fancy could not spread her painted wings. No chains for my limbs, no lashes for my back, no fires for my flesh, no master's frown or threat, no following another step, no need to bow, to cringe or crawl, or utter lying words. I was free. I stood erect and fearlessly, joyously faced all the worlds. And then my heart was filled with gratitude, with thankfulness, and went out in love to all the heroes, the thinkers, who gave their lives for the liberty of hand and brain, for the freedom of labor and thought, to those who fell on the fierce fields of war, to those who died in dungeons bound with chains, to those who proudly mounted scaffold stairs, to those whose bones were crushed, whose flesh was scarred and torn, to those by fire consumed, to all the wise, the good, the brave of every land whose thoughts and deeds have given freedom to the sons of man. And then I vowed to grasp the torch that they had held and hold it high, that light might conquer darkness still. Let us be true to ourselves, true to the facts that we know, and let us above all things preserve our souls. If there be gods, we cannot help them, but we can assist our fellow man. We cannot love the inconceivable, but we can love wife and child and friend. We can be as honest as we are ignorant. If we are, when asked what is beyond the horizon of the known, we must say we do not know. We can tell the truth, and we can enjoy the blessed freedom that the brave have won. We can destroy the monsters of superstition, the hissing snakes of ignorance and fear. We can drive from our minds the frightful things that tear and wound with beak and fang. We can civilize our fellow man. We can fill our lives with generous deeds, with loving words, with art and song, and all the ecstasies of love. We can flood our years with sunshine, with the divine climate of kindness, and we can drain to the last drop the golden cup of joy. Do you have any understanding now of why Robert Ingersoll is an agnostic? Is there anything you could possibly say to contradict him? Anything you can disagree with that he has to say? Does any of it make sense? Did he make you think? Did he shake some of your beliefs? Did he at least challenge them? Did he make any points with you? Are you ready to admit that faith is a hell of a lot closer to fear? Fear of not believing? Do you believe because you're afraid not to believe?
There's absolutely no reason.
Hey, Rick, the cab driver in Tampa. Rick, you're on the air at WFLA.
Hello, Bob. I haven't got much time to say what I got to say, but the only thing I will say is that I believe in my religious beliefs for two main reasons. One is fear, and it's the fear of purposelessness, a fear that I can't tolerate the existence of no purpose whatsoever. And that's what life basically boils down to.
No purpose whatsoever. I mean, it isn't loving your wife and raising your children and being honest with your friends and so forth, isn't that purpose?
Not ultimately, no, because ultimately it all adds up to nothing. Because once you die and that's
Love
the end,
adds up to nothing?
if you die and that's the end, it's it. It's over. You don't remember anything. It's gone. It adds up to nothing. It's vanity. It's purposelessness.
So you would rather believe in something that you can't even begin to prove exists, and while doing that, ignore what you know exists.
No, I don't ignore anything. I believe there is a rational, logical way of interpreting the Bible, and everything I believe is based on rationality and logic. I don't believe simply...
And so therefore you chose to ignore everything that you just heard for the last 2 hours and 18 minutes.
No, I just disagree with a lot of his concepts about the Bible, and I disagree with a lot of his conclusions about it.
Like what?
I disagree with a lot of yours.
Like what?
Well, for example, the Genesis account, if you talk about the creation of the earth, if you understand the viewpoint from whence it is written, it makes perfect sense.
No, you're making excuses for it. It makes no sense whatsoever, and on top of that, it lies.
That's according to what you see in it. I see it completely different.
No, I'll give you a real nice, easy explanation. Did God create the earth?
Yes.
Then he was satisfied with it.
When he first created it, it was formless and waste.
But when he created the earth, he was satisfied with it. When he separated the waters and, made the continents and all, he was satisfied with it, right?
More or less.
What do you mean, more or less? It says in the book that he was.
Well, he was happy with what was resulted at that point.
He said that he was happy with it and the job was done. Well, the job isn't done. There are continents being created as we speak.
Well, it doesn't say anything about him creating continents. All it says
Oh,
the
doesn't
Earth's
it?
creation was completed.
I guess it wasn't.
Well, it is. It's
Oh, but it isn't.
just
It's
on a
constantly
self-cycle.
changing. It is constantly changing. There are continents being eroded as we speak. There are
That's all
continents
part of the
being
same creation.
created as we speak.
That's all part of the same creation.
Oh, then he hasn't finished with it yet, but yet it says in the book that he has.
He has.
And that he was
He's not
satisfied
causing
with it.
these new continents. They're doing it on their own.
Oh, I see. So then God is not the only one that can create. Nature can create too.
Well, of course.
Oh, I see. So then, therefore, God is not all powerful. There are other creative forces in the world.
Well, he's all powerful in the sense that nothing can withstand his will. He's not
Oh,
all
obviously
powerful in the sense
nature.
that nothing else can
Obviously
create.
nature. If nature is destroying what God created,
Nature is not
then he must be
destroying what God
powerless.
created.
Well, you just told me it was. You agreed with me that
I'm saying
the
it's creating
continents
things
are
on its own.
eroding. Big rocks are eroding as you and I speak.
Well, that doesn't mean that
Those,
was in God's
those
plan.
very rocks that God made and was so happy with.
Well, that doesn't mean it was anything against his purpose. It simply means that that's the way he envisioned it to begin with.
And was satisfied with, said this is good.
Yes.
Oh, but it mustn't have been.
Well, why not?
Well, because he allowed it to change.
So, what's wrong with change? Do you think God is stagnant? Static? Without thought?
Oh, he must be.
Why?
Because he's perfect.
If he was without thought and being static, he
Well,
wouldn't be God.
what is
He
the
wouldn't be
purpose of thought, Rick?
alive. The purpose of thought is to be alive.
Yeah, to grow.
Right.
Oh, so God is still growing. He still doesn't know everything.
Well, I don't think he does know everything, no. I don't think he can, because he said we're made in his image, and we certainly don't know everything.
We certainly don't. Thank you, Rick.
You're welcome.
21.
Hello, Sam. I appreciate your show.
Yeah, is the American Revolution over?
Well, no, I say it's not. Instead of the red coats, we got reds, all right. And you know, Sam, what I'd do if I could get all these communists together, I'd set them on fire. And all these Jane Fonda people and hippies and peace movement and all that's a bunch of crap. You might think I'm a kleptomaniac because I want to set everybody on fire.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
I appreciate you.
All righty, that's Lud,
Thank
Plant
you very
City.
much for giving me the time, the opportunity to talk.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks for
And I
calling, Lud. I got to go.
Your show and all you've done for America.
Yeah, I got to go, Lud.
I
Thanks.
appreciate
Bye-bye.
you very
Okay,
much.
goodbye.
Thank you again. I'm on fire.
All right, I will.
Sam McClellan, a fine American, on 970 WFLA, the talk of Tampa Bay.
224. Scott in Clearwater. Scott, you didn't follow the rules.
What's the rule, sir?
Well, I believe I said at the beginning of the program that if you don't have an open mind, if you can't admit that you might be wrong, then please don't listen.
Oh, I see. Well, I have a very open mind, and that's why I believe the Bible to be true. It has everything mapped out for us. It tells us what's going to happen in the future. It tells us what the penalty for sin is. And
Right tells us that disease is caused by evil spirits.
Right. I told you before when we talked about demons, if you wanted to see, we live in a very sophisticated world. Would you like a videotape of a person who is demon-possessed and then is delivered from the demons, and you can even talk to this person for yourself?
Yes, I've talked to many actors who were very convincing.
No, not an actor, but right here in St. Petersburg, or close by in St. Petersburg at the Crossroads
Cathedral.
Cathedral, right.
Yeah, I've talked with Leslie Hale. Fascinating man. Actually like him.
Well, excuse me, not Crossroads Cathedral. Suncoast Cathedral.
Yeah, I know he moved.
No, it's not the same
Oh.
church. But it is the Suncoast Cathedral. There was a girl, blonde-haired girl there who was demon-possessed. She was held by at least 4 or 5, big grown men there. And later, I guess a few weeks later, she was on Channel 22.
You know, Scott, you're demon-possessed. You're possessed by the demon of ignorance and superstition.
But it's funny, though, that
and imprisoned by fear.
this man that you
Fear to the
quoted
point
from...
where you absolutely deny reality.
No, I don't deny reality. In fact, God is reality. Jesus Christ is reality. He's the truth. If you want to know truth, look to Jesus Christ.
He's a carbon copy of those that came before him many, 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 many times, Scott.
Well, not
Carbon
really,
copy.
because I believe that all the other world religions are counterfeits, and they would like to draw you. But had the man who you were quoting from had read Job chapter 38, he would have found out about the author of that
See,
book.
Scott, I despise you and your religion. If there is a God,
That's okay.
if there is a God, Scott, how dare you perpetuate the myth, the belief that this is an evil, vengeful person, God, if you will, that he loves and thrives upon punishment. How dare you blaspheme the name of God that way? How
I'll tell you why
dare
he
you create a
punishes
God
people.
that's a monster?
Well, wait a minute, Bob. You just had 2 hours now. Let me have a couple minutes. See, God is a holy God, and he wants people, his believers, to also be holy, like him.
Yeah,
But if we choose to be unholy,
except that he just can't figure out a way to get his message to everybody. And so billions of people have died and
That's why
gone
you
to
have to
hell
be born
because
again.
they never had the privilege of hearing his message. God, Scott, I despise you and your God. You blaspheme in every way
you
possible.
sound like a New Ager, Bob. They also hate the God of the Bible.
No, Scott, I
yeah,
hate
they
you
do.
and your God. Well, it depends on what you mean. Could you be a little more explicit here?
Sure. If you believe in the ultimate decency and uprightness of man, that's a faith assertion, is it not? I mean, you can't really prove that, or could you? Would you say that you could prove that?
Yeah, I can. By life experience, most people I run into are decent people.
Okay, but how would Hitler fall into that?
Well, I said most people I run into are decent people.
Okay. I'm using the phone.
What now? Who are you?
I'm using the phone.
Who are you not?
I'm nobody. I'm just using the phone.
Use it here.
I'm going. Thank you. Excuse me. What I was saying, I'm sorry, I just got interrupted.
Mm-hmm.
If you believe in man's ultimate good by your experience, that's still something that's subjective on your part, is it not? It's just your experience, not anything that you can ultimately prove. I mean, I would not use my experience as the other caller was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't tell you believe in God because I talk to him every day. I mean, how would you know if that was God or it was gas, right?
That's right.
Would you agree?
Yep.
Okay. So the same thing with your experience with good people.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you've known some good people and you've known some bad people.
Well, first of all, Jim, I think you're coming at me from the wrong direction. I don't deny the existence of God. That would be an utterly absurd thing to do.
No, and I'm sorry.
I'm talking about the fallacy of religion. Same thing that Ingersoll talked about.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry. I missed your earlier discussion with regard to Ingersoll. But I believe in God, and I believe in purpose, meaning, and rationality in the universe on the basis of a creator God who defined purpose, meaning, and rationality in the universe. If the universe is ultimately irrational based on evolution, then how would we find meaning and purpose in the universe? I claim...
Well, I think we have an awful lot of, ridiculous purpose in the universe, don't you?
Yeah, but I can codify that in a religious sense that makes sense, that is not completely by faith assertion.
No, what you can tell me that there are an awful lot of things in this life that you don't understand, so therefore there must be a God. Now that's not a logical statement.
No, but I didn't say that. My belief in God explains love. If I believe that there was a creator that defined meaning in the universe and defined the limits of love, then I know on the basis of my faith that my love makes sense. The love that I have for my wife makes sense. It's not just some sort of...
Well, does it make sense that you can love your wife and love your children and do your job honestly and pay your taxes and pay your bills and help your fellow man and still not go to your final reward?
I beg your pardon?
Does it make any sense that you can love your wife and your children and do your job honestly and pay your bills and help your fellow man and still not go to your final reward because you haven't uttered some magic words?
Yes, it would.
That makes sense to you.
But I don't think that would be... Not if I believe that...
Therefore,
the universe was ultimately irrational.
Jim, therefore, then the entire purpose in the universe, if you can do all of those things and still not get your final reward because you didn't utter the magic words, then therefore the purpose that we were created for was to serve and worship this vastly superior being who apparently has an inferiority complex and needs pitiful slime to worship him.
No, he doesn't need anything.
Oh, I beg your pardon. That would be the purpose for our existence.
No, the purpose for our existence is not necessarily the same thing as the purpose for his existence.
Well, it must be. If he is willing to punish you forever for not uttering the magic words and to forget all of your other good deeds, as the Christian Bible teaches, then he must need it.
Well, the Creator has a right.
Otherwise, he's a monster. I mean, if he doesn't need it, I mean, if you need to drink my blood to survive, then, while I'm still going to be a little bit distraught with you for doing it, I could kind of understand. But if you don't need to drink my blood and you just do it anyway, then I'm going to be a little bit PO'd.
If God needs anything, then he's no longer God, then, is he? I mean, by definition.
That's my point, Jim. That's exactly my point.
And my point is that if you assert that he needs anything, then you don't really understand what it is that he's saying.
Then he must be a monster if he doesn't need it and is willing to punish you for not doing what he doesn't need. He must be a monster, Jim, and I simply cannot accept that. I will not accept that God is a monster.
Okay, if you're then again, that's your perspective and your inability to accept that doesn't...
So then you're telling me that you can accept that God is a monster?
No, I can't either.
Well, then why do you attribute to him monstrous deeds?
No, I haven't.
Yes, you just did.
I'm saying my presuppositions are different from yours. And since all true reasoning is circular, you and I can never come to the same conclusions based on different presuppositions.
It's because you're not willing to throw out religion. You're not willing to separate a belief in God from religion.
And you're not willing to separate rationality from an irrational universe. You want to attribute...
Whoa, wait a second. How could a perfect universe with purpose be irrational?
I didn't say it was.
Could have sworn you did at the beginning of the conversation, Jim. I got to run.
Now more with WFLA's Bob Lassiter.
Thank you, Poopsie. 3:31, Poopsie Richards there. 3:31 the time.
I beg your pardon, sir.
Well,
Poopsie?
Poopsie,
I've never been called Poopsie in my life by anyone.
Well, yesterday when I called you Bubba, you said that wasn't your nickname, that you had another one, but you weren't going to tell us what it was. So I just thought every day we'll try a new one.
Well, wrong again today.
Until you finally, acquiesce to it.
I like Don. That's perfectly wonderful.
I don't at all.
Okay, now more with WFLA's Bob Lassiter.
Right. Whoopsie. 3:31 the time, one line of...
Priests who had vested interests, clergymen who were utterly rotten and evil. But then there are parts in the Bible that do teach us some of the things about decency, as you're talking about, morality.
Exactly, and almost all of them are ignored by the clergy.
Yes, much of the clergy.
See, I have a friend in the business, a friend who's a clergyman.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not doing very well financially.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the kind of guy that teaches the good stuff in the Bible.
Like Rabbi Bresky.
And we got into a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and he said, I don't know, give me some advice. And so I said, well, obviously you're missing the boat here. And unless you want to starve in the gutter, you've got to do what the guys who are successful are doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him about my little theory that people believe not so much because they want to, but they're afraid not to.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, the guys that have the packed churches and the packed synagogues and the packed whatevers, tents, whatever it might be, are all appealing to people's fear. You're rotten hell if you drink. You're rotten hell if you dance in the dance hall on Saturday night. And the people just open their pockets and give money and give more money, and they borrow money to give, and they do whatever they have to do in order to be around that man. Well, if you want to eat, that's what you got to do in the business.
Well, there are psychological reasons for that, and a book like James's Varieties of Religion, in which he talks psychologically about six souls. Of course there are six souls.
But may I, allow me to finish my point.
Excuse me.
You see, and what these preachers and rabbis and monks and all these other good guys are doing is they're talking to a room full of people that don't go to the dance hall on Saturday night. They're talking to a room full of people that do not abuse alcohol. Mm-hmm. They never tell the people to follow the Sermon on the Mount. They never tell the people to strip themselves of their worldly goods. 10% of them, but not all of them.
Well, I have found a community church where it is working, and I've taken Rabbi Bresky at his word, and I've gone back, and I am a humanist. And I don't even know whether I'm a Christian, because Nicaea, that the gentleman we're talking about, absolutely decimated Christianity. There wasn't any Christianity after that. There was the church. But there wasn't Christianity as the Master Jesus taught it, and if you teach it that way in terms of brotherhood and sisterhood and all those good things, then that's fine, and there is good spiritual content. But when you get into the religious part of it and you get into this business where you want to control people and get all their money, you can do it, but you can do it other ways too. You can do it through almost any, the politicians are doing it. They tell the people what they want to hear, and so do these religious people. Tell the people what they want to hear, and they run after it. But your friend that you were talking to, and I know Rabbi Bresky on the air is the same way. He's nearly starving to death, and he's come back, and he's trying to go back to God for the, quotes, right reasons, unquote. And when you start talking about fear in the Bible or the rod, people misinterpret that. Rod does not mean a switch. Rod means a guideline. Fear doesn't mean fear in terms of quaking. Fear means respect, if you go back to the original words. And many people haven't gone back to the original words, and I started arguing in a class on Corinthians, going back to the Greek and taking a lot of Greek words and tearing them apart and finding out that the English equivalents just are not correct, and that there is a leeway here in the spiritual interpretation of religion.
Bill, I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Be good. Too long.
You believe in has never revealed himself to you in no kind of way or form.
Correct, Joe.
And therefore, if we have a God who doesn't reveal himself in any way, then what different is that than the God of the Bible who does reveal himself and tell what his plans are?
I beg your pardon?
What different would it be a God who does not reveal himself to suffering man on earth at all to what you claim God does in the Bible?
I don't understand your question.
You're saying that God reveals him. You're saying you're not going to way that the Bible says what things the Bible says about God. And you say you believe in God.
And yet I said what?
That you believe in a God.
No, I didn't say that.
I think a God who doesn't reveal himself to his own
creation. I didn't say I believe in a God.
You believe in God.
It depends on what your description is of God.
Well, God is
normally thought of as a supreme being.
He is supreme.
Do I believe in supreme beings?
Right.
Well, I have no proof that they do not exist, and I can only assume that they do.
So why wouldn't God reveal himself to us then?
Because maybe he has nothing to do with me.
And also, Bob, everything we believe today is based on faith in a way. Because now we read the history about the Roman Empire, we read the history about George Washington and Columbus and all these other people. How do we know for real that these people really existed? That we didn't believe that they existed?
Because for most of the people that you speak of, George, the evidence is overwhelming. It is not from one book. It is not from one group of people who have a self-interest in my believing in George Washington.
Well, you don't believe that Christ existed, and the evidence is overwhelming that he existed.
If you want to think it is, Gerald, then, there's nothing I can possibly do.
It's a fact, Bob.
No, it's not a fact, Gerald. It's your belief.
You think that somebody just made up Christ and he got beat? So, Christianity is all over the world.
I have a very strong suspicion, and by the way, Gerald, it's a minority religion. It's not all over the world. There are other religions that are far larger.
I know. I'm saying that you can find Christianity in every part of the world. I'm not saying it's a majority religion. I'm saying it's spread all over the world.
Isn't it amazing that it's taken 2,000 years for it to become a minority religion?
Excuse me?
Isn't it amazing that it's taken 2,000 years for it to become a minority religion? Isn't it amazing, Gerald, that the only way to salvation is through a belief and acceptance of Christ, and what Christ did was he revealed himself to a bunch of ignorant people out in the middle of the desert with very little in the way of a written language, with very little in the way of commerce, and that since everybody on the face of the earth, in order to be saved and go to heaven, had to believe and accept in this deity, but this deity has such a poor way of getting the word around.
Well, if you read the Revelation, Bob, you'll find out. Now, I heard you talk about all these people who were killed and slaughtered and stuff in Canaan and stuff before the Israelites came in and stuff. But did you read the Bible where the Bible says that all the dead will be resurrected from the judgment? And
Did you ever read in the Bible, Gerald, where it said that all the saints were resurrected?
It didn't say that, Bob.
Yes, it does, Gerald.
The Bible speaks of a resurrection and a judgment.
No, Gerald, it speaks of all the graves opening and all the saints coming out and walking again on the face of the earth. It doesn't bother to mention, where they went, what they did, if they ever died again or anything like that. But again, Gerald, don't read it selectively. Read it entirely.
I have.
Apparently not, Gerald. Lynn and Tampa, you're on the air at WFLA.
Good evening, Bob.
Hi, Lynn.
Bob, I'm not on the same intellectual plane as a lot of your callers, and I'm not as well informed in theology as your callers. But over my lifespan, I was in some real tight situations, life-threatening situations, and I prayed to God, but I pray to God that I believe is within me. In other words, I think I have a spirit in me that tells me what's right and what's wrong, and the spirit in me knows what's right and what's wrong. And when in those situations, I prayed to the God within me to help lead me or help me do what I had to do. I can't visualize. I came from the North. I was raised in a Catholic background. My wife was a Southern Baptist from Alabama. So we settled on a Methodist church.
That's a real daily double.
Yeah, really. But I could not believe, Bob, that I can't tell my family background, but for instance, in the organized crime, the mafia, most of those fellows are very religious guys. I mean, they go to Mass regularly. They may go out and have a couple of guys shot during the week, but Sunday they were in a confessional, and they were very, in their own eyes, they were devout Catholics, and particularly their wives. Their wives used to go to Mass almost every day. But I could never visualize how the Vatican could accept millions of dollars from these guys who were part of organized crime, peddling drugs and everything, and how these guys could commit these sins and then go in and confess and think that they would be absolved of all these things. I never could understand it, and so...
Well, it's really very simple, and they were able to accept the money from the crime lords the same way they were able to accept money and support and actually help the kings who had serfs, who owned people, and the church actually helped the king keep those serfs in line.
Yes, and the Inquisition and all that. So this is all a matter of history where they've used the church as a means instead of propagating the growth of the underclass people and helping them all get a better education, even going back that far.
Why don't people stop and think? Why aren't the jails filled with secular humanists? They aren't. They're filled with believers. Why aren't the jails filled with atheists? They aren't. They're filled with believers.
Yeah. Well, this has been a very interesting subject, Bob, and I'll continue to listen. I've learned a lot this afternoon, and thanks for putting it on the air. It had to be done.
Thank you, Lynn.
All right.
Understand replying to it. Don't want to hear it, I guess. What they want to hear.
The church in those days fought tooth and nail with every new development in medicine because, for example, tuberculosis, the treatment for tuberculosis was praying to a saint. There was a special saint for tuberculosis, and therefore coming up with any type of treatment or cure for it was going against the will of God. That was perpetuated by this story of Christ driving evil spirits from people and curing them.
Unreal.
Indeed. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Robert. Good afternoon.
You too. One line available. It's in Hillsborough, 990-9352. Bill in Clearwater. Bill, you're on the air at WFLA.
Yes, Bob, I'm at work, and I walk around with the earphones on so I don't disturb anyone. I listen to the Ingersoll for 2 hours. I had heard of Ingersoll in the past, never heard it in its entirety.
It's almost impossible to get his writings.
Well, what I wanted to say was I would have liked to see you give equal time maybe to the Sermon on the Mount and,
I've done hours on the Sermon on the Mount.
Okay, at the time, but what I wanted to point out, and you seem to be the big thing, your objection to religion seems to be the fear that it instills.
Yes, okay. It is probably the fear and the ignorance that it perpetuates.
A lot of listeners out there are probably feeling guilty because they probably have that fear. But there is a quote in Scripture that says, fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So if you don't have that fear, you may not ever wise up. In fact, that humanistic thing
Why should you fear something that's just?
Because that is the Lord's way. You have to fear the Lord because He is just.
A man should not fear justice. A man should love justice.
No, see, you're turning it around. Fear of the Lord, not of justice. Fear of the Lord is
not the Lord justice? Is not the Lord mercy?
Yes, and that's why He has to be just.
And good? Is not the Lord good?
He has to be because He is.
Well, why should you fear goodness and justice and mercy and love?
It's the same reason you fear a judge if you've committed a homicide and you go before him and are found guilty. You fear that judge. You fear that jury. You fear that prosecutor. But if you would have summed that up...
But wait a second. You have nothing to fear so long as you lead a good life. Correct?
No, there's more than just a good life. You have to...
I don't fear the judge...
Being a good person
I don't fear the judge over in the federal courthouse because I don't violate the laws.
Yes, I understand. But the judge is not God. Fear of God is the beginning of wisdom.
Well, you tell the guy standing in front of the judge this afternoon, convicted of a crime, that the judge isn't God.
People that commit crime and do wrong, they know that without believing in God. But that humanistic thing you read from Ingersoll...
Wait a second, Bill. I beg your pardon. Are you not familiar with the statistics?
Of what?
95% of the population as a whole believes in God. And virtually 100% of the population in prison believes in God.
Well, it depends on what God you're talking about. You know, the sun god or, you know...
No, Bill. We're talking about the same guy.
There's only 30% at best of the world that are Christians, Bob. And my message...
Well, I was talking about America, you know, right here at home.
Well...
And it's actually much less than 30% of the Christians.
They're only a remnant, and that's the way it's going to be and has been and will be. But my message to some poor Christian out there, and that's worried now, is just what the Scripture says. Don't be afraid of fear of the Lord, and pick up your cross daily and carry it, and keep your eyes on things more heavenly than worldly.
And ignore reality.
No. Be in the world, but not of it. I hope that helps some of your listeners who you probably confused. And Shirley MacLaine could have wrote what Ingersoll wrote.
No, Shirley's not that smart, Bill. Not that smart at all.
She's smart. She has a couple of books, too. But thanks for your time and getting my calling.
Well, Bill, one thing. You see, Ingersoll would have been just as distressed with Shirley MacLaine as he is distressed with the preachers of his day.
Be childlike.
Because Shirley MacLaine also believes in myths and also believes in fantasy and supernatural things.
The answer to it all is be like children. Be childlike and think that way, and you'll find it a little
No, Bill. What you're saying is the answer to it all is to deny your intellect.
No, I
and
didn't
just
say
accept
that.
what someone else has told you.
Children learn every day, and you should learn every day. But don't be a
I do,
scoffer.
Bill. I do.
Well, that's why I'm calling.
Every day I learn.
Did you know that fear is the beginning of wisdom? You must have read that.
No, fear is not the beginning of wisdom, Bill.
That's what the Scripture says.
I don't care what the Scripture says, Bill.
I know.
Bill, the Scripture also said, Bill, the Scripture also says that God despises a woman's monthly flow.
Well, I don't
Same Scripture, Bill.
Really.
Yeah, I know. It's not a convenient one to recall. Pearl in Lutz. Hi, Pearl. You're on the air at WFLA.
I just got connected and disconnected with Bob. This is Pearl in Lutz.
Yeah, I know. You're on the air.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was disconnected. Okay. This thing you read on Ingersoll, I had read parts of it, and it is beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And I love the part where he said that he's free. And if people would only if they could just see through this religion thing, they could get this feeling. And it's just a shame to see people who are so hung up and so fearful that their life is misery. But one of the things I wanted to mention to you is that are you familiar with the publication Free Inquiry?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
Comes out of Buffalo, New York.
Mm-hmm.
They are trying to get a fund together now to do Ingersoll's house in Dresden, New York. And when they get it done, they want to furnish it with all memorabilia and library and things like that from Ingersoll. And then you're aware of the convention in August, the International Humanist and Ethical Union?
No, Pearl, I'm not here to promote any organizations. I'm just here to get people to think, period. I'm not here to promote any organizations or any conventions or any fundraising. It's not my purpose in life.
Mm-hmm. But a lot of people aren't aware, that these things even exist. And I think there are more people who really have grave doubts as far as religion and will admit it. I mean, no one could run for the United States and say that he was a secular humanist. He'd never get elected, and it scares the hell out of me that we had not one but two preachers running for the highest office in the country in this election. I mean, people are under the impression that this country was founded by religious people, and it wasn't. Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, most of these people were agnostics.
Or deists, Pearl. There's a difference.
Well, but they wrote the Constitution in such a way that they could keep the church from doing what it had done in England. And they weren't religious people, really, at all.
I know, Pearl. Pearl, I thank you very much. Lee in Clearwater. Lee, you're on the air, WFLA.
Good afternoon, Mr. Lassiter.
Afternoon, Lee.
Mr. Lassiter, Robert Ingersoll was a politician and a lawyer, and I have spent most of the last 30 years studying science. I've also studied the scriptures some. Albert Einstein was a noted scientist, as you know, and one law that wasn't mentioned in regards to some of his contradictions was Einstein's law of interconvertibility of energy and matter under his E equal MC square equation. You can do just exactly what it says in Genesis verse 3. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light.
Yeah, he also separated the light from the darkness, which you can't do.
From that point,
I said he also said that he separated the light from the darkness, which you can't do.
Yes, you can.
I beg your pardon. No, you can't. What is darkness, Lee?
Okay.
What is darkness, Lee?
Okay, I'm going to tell you.
No, I'll tell you. It's the absence of light. So how in the hell can you separate the two?
Well, we have the night and we have the day. We have the lesser lights and we have the greater lights.
No, we don't have lesser lights. We only have one light, the sun.
Well, surely, Bob, you can...
because the lesser light was the moon, which, of course, does not give off light.
At any rate, the principle here is that...
And you still cannot separate lightness from darkness.
The principle is from light, which is energy, you can create matter. Now, Ingersoll contradicted that. From matter,
I do believe I said when I started that there were many mistakes that Ingersoll made, but no one could ever accuse him of being dishonest.
Oh, okay, Bob. I didn't hear every bit of it. I was doing some work, so it was kind of long. I heard some of it. But, as far as the movement of the earth, after the creation of the earth, of course, we do have tectonic plates that are constantly moving. This is post-creation. It doesn't contradict the creation whatsoever.
Oh, it has to.
No way.
Oh, I beg your pardon. God was satisfied with his work, and it stopped on the sixth day. That's what it says.
Well,
read it and weep, Lee. 990-9352 in Hillsborough, 461-9352 in Pinellas. Lee in Temple Terrace. Lee, you're on the air, WFLA.
Good afternoon, Mr. Lassiter.
Afternoon, Lee.
Yeah, read it and weep. That's what most of them need to do, is read that piece of trash they call the Bible. They read it cover to cover, they'd see what it was filled with. But I had a message for this Scott that was harping on Christ this and Christ that, and he's the only one. If he would do his research, go down to the library, look it up a little bit. In India, they had Christ. It was all spelled almost the exact same way, the exact same birth legend, mother legend. Everything about it was exactly the same as the story of Christ's birth, including the way he died and who he died between. And he does his own God a disservice if he isn't intelligent enough to go down and look things up.
Does himself a disservice as well, but you're quite right when you talk about doing God a disservice. Biblical scholars are very well aware of, first of all, the contradictions. Secondly, the injustice. They're very well aware of all that is contained between the covers of that particular document. Very well aware of it. And they do everything in their power to steer people away from the horrors of the Bible, which is being dishonest with the people.
Yeah,
to give a creating, loving God credit for also being a monster, which is what, of course, the Bible does, is ludicrous.
When you go to church when you're a kid, they pick and choose the scriptures you should read and memorize, but they don't encourage the complete reading of the book. And to that fossil they called from Clearwater earlier, he really needs to talking about the learning, all the knowledge was contained. You really ought to go and look at the history of Europe when Christians started coming into power, and just take into account all the libraries and universities and everything that was totally destroyed by the Christians.
Well, there's something else he ought to take into consideration before he bends over backwards to justify the absurdities in the book of Genesis, and that is that nowhere in that book is it attributed to Jehovah, to God. It's just a story.
Quite right.
Doesn't say in there that as God told it to me. It's just a story.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Be good. 2 lines available, both in Hillsborough, 990-9352. 2:50 through the time. 1 line open. It's in Hillsborough, 990-9352. Helen in Seminole. Hi, Helen. You're on the air, WFLA.
Hello, Mr. Lassiter. I tuned in about halfway through your program, and I must say I found it very, very interesting. I'm not really, I'm rather ignorant of Mr. Ingersoll, and perhaps later you could tell me perhaps the name of some books or something I could pick up from the library.
Well, you'd have a very difficult time. Ingersoll's work is very hard to come by. Ingersoll is despised by the establishment in this country, just as, Thomas Paine's work is very hard to come by, too, because they both raise some very legitimate questions that don't really have answers.
Yes, it's a shame that more people aren't interested in finding the answers. Myself, I had an Anglo-Catholic background, which was very dogmatic, and I rebelled. My intelligence really rebelled against that. I think Christ was probably a very good person, but I think his teachings have probably been corrupted by men since then for their own interests.
If indeed he existed.
Well, he probably existed as a historical figure, but I think a lot of the things that have been said about him and done in his name since are based on absolute mythology. Probably the fear. People have a fear of knowledge. They seem to have a fear of knowledge. They want to believe in God. They need to believe in God because they want that father figure up there taking an interest, looking after them. They're afraid to take responsibility for their own lives, and it's an understandable fear. I mean, wouldn't it be lovely if there was a father in heaven who was looking out for us? But it's just doesn't make sense.
It sure doesn't.
No. My own personal beliefs. Well, I try to keep an open mind, but I really can't believe in a God whose image we were created in. I think it's more the other way around. We're creating God in our own image.
Well, considering that God has all the same prejudices that we do, and all these prejudices that make no sense whatsoever, then it does appear, a reasonable man might conclude that it was the other way around.
Yes, I think so, really. When I think back to my school days, I went to a Catholic convent school. I became very, very... When I really looked at the services with clear, open eyes, and I found that it's true what Ingersoll was saying earlier, that these aspects of worship and sacrifice, what sort of God, what sort of I'm personifying him here myself now, but what sort of God would be interested in us making sacrifices and worship? It's so barbaric.
Well, what sort of infinite, perfect being needs the worship of these insignificant little fleas on this speck out in the middle of the universe? I mean, what kind of God thrives on the worship of these evil, vile little creatures?
How true. And what awful things have been perpetrated in the name of various religions, too. It's crazy to think that there is somebody there. It's unfortunate that people have closed their minds, really, because it is closing mind, because if you look at it logically, it just doesn't make sense. But isn't it amazing how many really people that are otherwise extremely intelligent, when it comes to religion, they believe totally dogmatically. And I've found
Well, that's where my theory that people don't believe in God, they're afraid not to.
They're afraid not to. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
How else could people of intellect, and there are many people of intellect who firmly believe, firmly, they have to be afraid not to.
Yes, but you never get a logical answer when you ask them why and yes, but, and those sort of questions. They've got no explanation. It's just an emotional thing.
Helen, I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bob.
Take care. Ken in Port Richey. Ken, you're on the air, WFLA.
Hear from you again. I've got a couple of points I'd like to espouse.
Sure.
First of all, the gentleman several callers back who was saying that something about fear and all this other stuff. Wisdom allays fear, according to the Bible. And the more knowledge you have, the less fearful you can become.
Well, exactly. Nobody ever started studying the sea because they were afraid of it. They were curious by it.
Exactly, Bob. Now, the next thing. etymologically, if you look up the word religion, you find that religion stems from the word superstition. And that's a fact. You can look in the Oxford English Dictionary and find out that that's the etymological root of the word religion. The next thing, in addition to Ingersoll, who I have his volumes here at home, people should also read Whitman, A Song of Myself. And these people that are condemning and labeling humanists, my question to them is, if you cannot understand man, how in the world can you understand a supreme being of God and expect to accept all of these things that he's supposed to be throwing at us? It drives me up a wall. These people that are afraid of the, I'm going to use the label secular humanist, are afraid because of their pessimism, their lack of belief that man can survive, can do what he can do on his own without the umbrella of God.
Well, no, there's a far greater benefit from religion, and that is the relief of responsibility for your own actions, because not only is there salvation with religion, but there's somebody to blame for when you fail. The devil.
Right.
Devil's more important in Christianity than Christ is.
Exactly.
Ken, I gotta run out on you. I'm out of time for this hour.
I understand, Bob. Later.
Thank you. One line open. It's in Hillsborough, 990-9352. Don't venture very far. One more hour yet to go. 3 o'clock. Welcome back. Friday, April the 22nd, 1988. Fourth final hour for this edition of the Lassiter Show. Board's full. No sense in prolonging the agony any longer. David in Lutz. David, you're on the air at WFLA.
Hello, Bob. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you.
I could not contain myself today. You really got a good show going.
Thank you.
I'm a philosophy major, so I'm obviously an intellectual orgasm right now, but I sort of miss this a lot. And I'm very, very surprised this is on a radio program. That's one point that I think one lady alluded to. She's also from Lutz, I noticed. A couple of people back here that trying to get organized and all that sort of thing. One other person asked for equal time to demonstrate the problem that I'm bringing out here, is that most people who agree somewhat with Ingersoll, and I totally agree with him, they have a failure to organize. The one thing that the religious people have in their favor is that they reinforce their belief every Sunday and Wednesday if they have Bible school or Bible, whatever it's Wednesday night Bible night. So their beliefs are reinforced continually, and that is a major source of the problem. Part of the problem of critical thinking is that there's no real education going on. I notice at USF there is a movement afoot now to get a course in epistemology, which is really the theory of validity and knowledge. How do we go about finding out how we determine whether something is true or false, that kind of thing. Logic, you can call it logic if you want. But that's refreshing to know that that may or may not be available at the college level.
Well, one of the great problems is the current establishment in this country, whatever the hell that means, I'm not really sure, really doesn't have any great interest in critical thinking, and a population that critically thinks it's actually against their interest.
Well, I'm not saying anything critically here, Bob, but if we had a decent level of thinking in this country, disciplined thinking, you probably wouldn't have a show if you think about it. Of course, it could be a lot better, a higher quality show, in my opinion. You wouldn't have to resort to selling your tights, or whatever, you did the other day, which I was very sorry to see. But anyway, sorry to see them go, by the way. But there are several things where I can help out, I think, just to, get in and get out here. Robert Ingersoll is not the only person to write a treatise on agnosticism. He was a well-known agnostic. He's really a lawyer by trade. But obviously, Common Sense, The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine, or one of the earlier, he was a rabid atheist, not an agnostic, but he went all the way with it. But there are other things that are going on right now. I mean, God, Man, and the Thinker, religious belief, the existence of God, any of them are available at any bookstore. You can buy them and read them, and they're not that tough to, I mean, there are long words like epistemology I just used and teleology and everything else, but they deal with the honest-to-God theories in the belief in God. And critically, also, the pros as well as the cons.
Oh, no, they don't really deal with the belief in God. They deal with religion.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. There is a difference between the two to me. Religion is organized. It has dogma. It is, as I said, every Sunday and Wednesday, or Friday, or Saturday in the case of Judaism. But it's reinforced. Religion is an institution more than it is a belief. And the word belief, by the way, a good treatise on that, Belief and Doubt by C.S. Peirce, fantastic. It deals with what Ingersoll did not deal with, mostly because he wrote his at a little bit earlier time than Peirce was writing. It deals with what is the notion of a belief and what is the notion of faith. And the first, dealing with the difference between the two, the first principle of belief is doubt. And faith has no doubt. You hear people a lot of times saying, well, I have faith in, or I believe in, and they think they're meaning the same thing. And in actuality, when you get down and define the terms, the first principle of belief is doubt. So therefore, I really don't believe what I'm believing in, if you understand what I'm saying.
I do.
Faith means I have faith in God, and therefore I don't care what you think, and it doesn't matter whether it's true or untrue. There is no epistemological basis upon which I am basing my quote-unquote belief.
Faith is the acceptance of something that cannot be proven.
Exactly. Well,
that's what faith is. I have faith in you, David, to be a good caller. I can't prove that you are going to be, but I have faith in you.
There are guys like C.B. Martin who will say that I have a perfect belief and faith in God, and I talk to him every day. And that is one argument that agnosticism and atheism cannot really refute. It's an argument from what's called solipsism. Solipsism is the basic belief that all that exists are me and my opinions, or my beliefs, or my perceptions. And it's kind of hard to counter that. If I talk to God every day and it's my own personal language, and well, you're in your own realm. I mean, that's as close to being hallucinatory as possible, But there's no logical argument that you can counter with that. But it's, to me, and probably to you too, it's a very vacuous argument. I mean, what can you say about it?
Well, what it is it's talking to yourself. Yeah. It's reasoning with yourself. It's working your own problems out. Just substitute a word or two along the way. Oh, self, I've got myself in a hell of a mess. What can I do to get out of it, or whatever the problem might be?
Absurdity. It's absurd, but some people do argue that position. And in fact, it's recognized as the only position where you can actually stand up all day and argue it and probably win, quote unquote, if you can win something like that. But anyway, I just had to call. I listen to your program occasionally. I steal myself away from my computer. And how's yours doing, by the way? Did you get it fixed?
Oh yes.
But anyway, I could not avoid not calling.
Thank you, David.
Encourage you to keep doing so.
Take care.
Thank you.
One line available. It's in Hillsborough County, 990-9352. George in Tampa. George, you're on the air, WFLA.
Hello, Bob. Thank you for bringing Ingersoll to your listeners. I have a few quotes, if you wouldn't mind, from Ingersoll, very short.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. There is no harmony between religion and science. When science was a child, religion sought to strangle it in the cradle. And then,
which is a fact.
For a fact. He who endeavors to control the mind by fear is a tyrant, and he who submits is a slave. And another, the church has always been willing to swap off treasures in heaven for cash down. And finally, if I were a god, I would make health catching instead of disease. And that's about it. I have my view on, the last caller mentioned a few things. As far as God, what is God or whatever, I believe there are, as many gods as there are people who believe in God. And each one is different. Because each belief or whatever impression or perception of God it would be different in every instance. And as far as the others that might speak of God or what is your impression of God, Frank Lloyd Wright died about 25 years ago. He was interviewed by Mike Wallace at one time, and Mike Wallace referred or made reference to his non-belief. And Frank Lloyd Wright replied, I spell nature with a capital N. And I would believe that people with the Frank Lloyd Wright type, they would, of course, share the views pretty much of Ingersoll. So again, I want to thank you for bringing him. I didn't think I'd ever hear his name mentioned on the radio here.
George, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Take care, Rick in Clearwater. Rick, you're on the air at WFLA.
Hello, Bob Lassiter.
Hi, Rick.
Am I glad to finally get a hold of you? I can see now why people call in and they call you names and write you nasty letters, because you're taking people out here in this audience, and instead of allowing them to accept things without question, you're making them think. And that's just terrible of you, isn't it? Us poor people out here have to finally think. Well, let me add a little fire to the fuel on this topic today. If these people would go to their ministers, priests, rabbis, and whatever, ask them to dig out some information about the Council of Nicaea, Nicea, in the year 533. It happened in a town called Constantinople. It seems that way back then, a group of fellas got together and they thought that people needed a little more control. So a lot of those things that we feel are so precious in the Bible today were sort of rewritten so that we could have a little, or so there could be more controllability over little people like me and you and everyone else. And a lot of these things that were rewritten were things like, what ye sow, so shall ye reap, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You know, the Bible has about 125 different instances in it. I sure don't have time to, tell them all to you now, but it seems that all the teachings, be it Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, all the spiritual teachings tell us that, like kingdom of heaven's within you, know thyself, that will set you free, to thine own self be true. I simply take all this to mean, and I've done a lot of studying on it, is you and I and everything that we experience good is what God meant us to be. And instead of believing all this, people ought to try experiencing it a little more. Because there's good and there's bad in all of us, we all know that. But the good part of us is so dang deep and hidden by society as we know it, that when you get on the air and you start these people thinking, they start thinking back, now wait a minute, that just doesn't set right. If God done this and that, and here I am sending all this money each week to this guy that's standing up on that pulpit, and he's not only not coveting my neighbor's wife, he's doing a job on secretaries and this and that, so he can slide with it and we'll still back him. People are thinking, and that's what I think. You are so marvelous. You could not beat me off of listening to you each and every day with a stick, because finally people's minds are opening up. I guess I'm a little
careful. That's what Ingersoll thought too.
Yeah, and he did a magnificent job of it.
He was convinced that the Christian religion would be gone by this point in time. He was convinced.
Well, the Christian,
another area where he was wrong.
Yeah. Well, everyone has their own belief in what religion is. I don't care if they sit in the church all day long. You've got churches where you're allowed to sit in there all day long. You're allowed to go out and get drunk and do a job on your neighbor's wife. But if you come back the next week, hey, and you say, I'm a bad guy, it's okay. That isn't religion. That's a cop-out. And that isn't what the good book says. And so many religions interpret it the way that religion needs to hold their numbers. Again, it's control of people. But if they would ask their ministers, priests, rabbis to check that out, the Council of Nicaea, in the year 533, I think they'll find out some things that'll really make their hair stand up on end because it's very, very interesting.
Rick, thank you very much.
Thanks for the time.
You too. One line available. It's in Hillsborough, 990-9352.